In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And sometimes, in the forgotten corners of that eternal conflict, the past collides with the present in ways that defy imagination. Picture this. Deep within the ruins of a shattered fortress monastery, buried beneath centuries of rubble and dust, something ancient stirs. Not from life, not yet, but from the presence of visitors who have no concept of what they've stumbled upon. A warband of Orks, those brutal Xenos who terrorize the galaxy for the sheer joy of a good scrap, have just discovered something that hasn't moved in over 1,000 years. A space marine dreadnought. And not just any dreadnought, but one that has been sleeping in stasis for exactly 1,111 years. What happens next is a collision between two of the most distinctive elements of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. On one side, you have the tragic nobility of the Dreadnought, a fallen hero entombed in a walking sarcophagus, kept alive through ancient technology and the grim determination of the Adeptus Astartes. On the other, you have the Orks, a race of green-skinned barbarians whose approach to technology can be summed up as hit it until it works, and whose enthusiasm for violence is matched only by their complete lack of respect for anything remotely sacred. This is their story. This is what happens when the unstoppable force of Ork enthusiasm meets the immovable object of space marine determination. The fortress monastery lies in ruins, its proud spires reduced to jagged teeth of stone jutting from the planetary surface, like the bones of some long-dead beast. This place was once a bastion of the Imperium, home to a chapter of space marines whose names have been lost to time and the ravages of war. The attack came swiftly, devastatingly, over 11 centuries ago. Whether it was Chaos forces, Xenos invaders, or some other calamity, the records are unclear. What matters is that when the fortress fell, not everything within it was destroyed. Some sections collapsed into the bedrock, creating sealed chambers and forgotten vaults where the darkness has reigned unchallenged for over a millennium. In one such chamber, sealed by thousands of tons of rubble and completely cut off from the outside world, stands a Castroferrum pattern dreadnought. The machine is silent, its systems in the deepest levels of stasis, drawing only the most minimal power to keep its precious cargo alive. Within the armored sarcophagus at its heart, suspended in amniotic fluid and connected to the machine through a web of neural interfaces, lies what remains of a space marine who fell in battle when the fortress was still standing. Brother Captain Marcus of the Crimson Sentinels, a warrior who led his brothers through 100 battles before taking wounds so grievous that only interment in a dreadnought could preserve his life and service to the Emperor. But Marcus doesn't know that 1111 years have passed. In the darkness of stasis, there is no sense of time, no awareness of the slow march of centuries. There are only dreams, if they can be called that. Fragmentary impressions, memories that blur and shift like oil on water. The face of his Primarch, seen once during a fleet review, the weight of his power sword in his hand, the roar of his brother's battle cries, the moment when the enemy's blow struck true and everything went dark. And then, the cold shock of awakening in this metal shell, the disorientation, the horror, the acceptance. And then, darkness again. Sleep. Eternal sleep, or so it seemed. The Orks arrive on this nameless world, as they arrive everywhere, without warning, without plan, and with an enthusiasm that borders on the manic. This particular warband, led by a warboss called Scragbad Metal Chomper, has been rampaging through this sector for months, looking for a good fight and some decent loot. The planet's meager human population was overrun in days, their settlements reduced to smoking craters, and their PDF forces scattered to the winds. But Scragbad isn't satisfied with such easy victories. He wants something more, something bigger, something that will make the other warbosses jealous and cement his reputation as the biggest and baddest git in the sector. So when his scouts report finding ancient ruins that look all Yumi and fancy-like, Scragbad's interest is piqued. Space Marine ruins mean Space Marine stuff, and Space Marine stuff means good loot. Power armor, weapons, maybe even one of those stompy walker things the Beakies use. So he gathers his best mech boys, his toughest knobs, and a mob of boys eager for whatever they might find, and they descend upon the ruins with all the subtlety of an orbital bombardment. The Orks don't excavate the ruins so much as they attack them. Explosives blast away at the rubble, heavy machinery, jury-rigged from looted Imperial equipment, and held together by Ork ingenuity and the Gestalt, psychic field of the Wah, tears into the collapsed sections. Gretchens scurry through the openings, searching for anything shiny or useful. It's chaotic, it's dangerous, and it's absolutely typical of Ork operations. And it works. Within hours, they've opened up sections of the fortress that haven't seen daylight in over 1,000 years. The discovery of the Dreadnought happens almost by accident. A Gretchen named Snicket, fleeing from a larger Gretchen who wants to bash him for taking more than his share of some looted food, squeezes through a crack in what used to be the fortress's armory level. The chamber beyond is intact, sealed by the collapse, but preserved in the airless darkness. And there, standing like a statue in the gloom, is the Dreadnought. Snicket's first instinct is to run, because that thing looks scary, and Gretchen are very good at recognizing when they're out of their depth. But then he notices that the machine isn't moving. It's just standing there, silent, dark. And where there should be noise and fury, there's only stillness. Snicket, displaying the kind of foolish courage that has gotten countless Gretchen killed over the millennia, edges closer. He taps the Dreadnought's armored leg with a piece of scrap metal. Nothing happens. He hits it harder. Still nothing. Emboldened, he climbs up onto the machine's foot and starts examining it more closely. And that's when he notices the details. The purity seals, cracked and brittle with age. The chapter heraldry, faded but still visible. The massive weapons mounted on the Dreadnought's arms, far larger than anything a normal Ork could hope to wield. This isn't just any piece of wreckage. This is something special. This is treasure. Snickgit's squealing summons other Gretchen, and soon a small mob of the creatures is swarming over the Dreadnought, poking and prodding and trying to figure out what it is and if it's valuable. The commotion eventually draws the attention of the bigger Orks, and so, when the first mech boy squeezes through the crack and sees what the Gretchen have found, his eyes light up with an enthusiasm that would make any tech priest weep in horror. Because to an Ork mech boy, a Space Marine Dreadnought isn't a sacred war machine housing the remains of a fallen hero. It's the biggest, most interesting pile of gubbins he's seen in months. Understanding Dreadnoughts, sacred war machines of the Adeptus Astartes. To fully appreciate the magnitude of what the Orks have discovered, we need to understand exactly what a Dreadnought is and what it represents to the Space Marines. A Dreadnought is not simply a weapon or a vehicle. It is a walking tomb, a life support system, and a weapon platform all rolled into one, housing the mortal remains of a Space Marine hero who has suffered wounds so catastrophic that even the enhanced physiology of the Adeptus Astartes cannot save him. When a Space Marine falls in battle with injuries that would be fatal to even his superhuman form, but his spirit and will to serve remain strong, the chapter's apothecaries and tech marines face a choice. They can allow the warrior to die with honor, or they can offer him a chance to continue his service in a different form. The process of creating a Dreadnought is as much ritual as it is surgery. The mortally wounded Space Marine is brought to the chapter's fortress monastery, to the sacred halls where such grim work is performed. There, the tech marines and their servitors work with reverent precision, removing what cannot be saved. Limbs torn beyond repair are amputated. Organs too damaged to function are excised. In the end, what remains is often shockingly little. A torso, perhaps, containing the Space Marine's enhanced organs. The head, housing the brain and the black carapace implants that allow a Space Marine to interface with his armor. sometimes, tragically, even less. This remnant of the once mighty warrior is then placed into an armored sarcophagus at the heart of the Dreadnought. The sarcophagus is filled with amniotic fluid, a thick, cold liquid that sustains the Marine's remaining tissue and fills his lungs. Neural interface cables are driven into the black carapace, creating a direct connection between the Marine's nervous system and the Dreadnought's control systems. The process is agonizing, a pain that burns through every nerve ending as flesh and machine become one. But for a space marine, pain is nothing compared to the opportunity to continue serving the Emperor. Once the connection is complete, the space marine becomes the Dreadnought. His thoughts control its movements, his will drives its weapons. He sees through its optical sensors, hears through its audio receivers, and fights with strength far beyond what his original body could have mustered. A Dreadnought stands roughly twice the height of a man, a towering construct of ceramite and adamantium, bristling with weapons, powerful enough to destroy tanks and tear through enemy formations. They are equipped with an array of devastating weaponry: assault cannons that can shred infantry and light vehicles, missile launchers capable of destroying armored targets, power fists that can crush the life from enemy warriors with a single blow, heavy flamers that cleanse the Emperor's enemies in purifying fire. But the physical power of a Dreadnought is only part of what makes them so valuable to a Space Marine chapter. The true importance of these ancient warriors lies in their experience and wisdom. Many Dreadnoughts are centuries old, some even millennia. Bjorn, the fell-handed of the Space Wolves, the oldest known Dreadnought in the Imperium, fought alongside the Primarch Leman Russ during the Horus Heresy over 10,000 years ago. He has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, seen the galaxy transform, and accumulated knowledge that no living space marine could hope to match. When Bjorn speaks, even the great wolf of the Space Wolves listens with reverence. This accumulation of experience is why Dreadnoughts are often referred to as ancients or venerables. They are living links to their chapters past, repositories of tradition, and tactical wisdom. Before major campaigns, chapter masters will often wake their Dreadnoughts to seek counsel, listening to advice from warriors who fought battles centuries before they were born. The Dreadnoughts remember the chapter's greatest victories and its most bitter defeats. They know the tactics that work and the mistakes that lead to disaster. They are teachers, advisors, and when necessary, the ultimate expression of the chapter's wrath in battle. But this existence comes at a terrible price. The extended neural interface between a space marine and a Dreadnought causes immense mental stress. Imagine being trapped in a body that isn't your own, unable to feel the simple sensations that make us human. No warmth of the sun on your face, no taste of food, no touch of a comrade's hand in greeting. Just cold metal and the constant hum of machinery. The sensory inputs from a Dreadnought are data, raw information translated through mechanical systems. It's enough to drive anyone mad, and for some Dreadnoughts, madness is exactly what happens. The psychological toll manifests in various ways. Some Dreadnoughts suffer from dyschronometria, losing all sense of time. Minutes feel like hours, or hours pass in what seems like seconds. Others experience confusion, struggling to remember who they are or when they are, their memories of different battles and different eras bleeding together into an incomprehensible whole. Still others fall into lethargy, their consciousness dulling as the centuries wear on, until they are little more than sophisticated weapon systems with barely a spark of the man who once inhabited them. The worst cases succumb to complete senility, their minds fractured beyond repair, kept functional only by the Dreadnought systems. To mitigate these psychological dangers, Space Marine chapters developed the practice of placing their Dreadnoughts into stasis between deployments. The warrior is returned to the chapter's fortress monastery after battle and placed in a stasis vault, a sacred chamber where Dreadnoughts stand in rows like sleeping giants. There, surrounded by the relics and honors of their chapter, they sleep. Not a natural sleep with dreams, but a deep, artificial unconsciousness induced by the Dreadnought systems. Time has no meaning in stasis. Consciousness simply stops. One moment the Dreadnought is being returned to the vault, the next he is being awakened for a new battle, with no awareness of the years or decades or centuries that have passed in between. For the entombed warrior, this is both mercy and curse. It preserves their sanity by limiting their exposure to the isolation and sensory deprivation of Dreadnought existence, but it also means they experience time in disconnected fragments. They wake for battles, fight with all the fury and skill they possess, and then return to sleep, only to wake again in a galaxy that has moved on without them. Friends are dead. Brothers they fought beside are gone. The very chapter they served may have changed beyond recognition. They are living ghosts, unstuck from time, forever fighting battles in a war that will never end. The oldest Dreadnoughts, those designated as venerable, carry this burden with quiet dignity. They have learned to accept their existence, to find purpose in their continued service despite the cost. They are awakened only in times of great need, when their experience and power are absolutely necessary. A venerable Dreadnought. Taking the field is a momentous occasion, inspiring the chapter's brothers with the presence of such ancient warriors. To fight alongside a venerable is to fight alongside legend itself, to be part of a tradition that stretches back through the centuries to the very founding of the chapter. But what happens when a Dreadnought is not awakened? When through disaster or catastrophe, a Dreadnought is lost, forgotten, sealed away in some dark corner where no one can find it. The stasis systems are designed to function for centuries on minimal power. They draw energy from ancient sources, maintenance is automated, and as long as the basic systems remain functional, the warrior within will sleep on, unaware, waiting for an awakening that may never come. This is the fate that befell Brother Captain Marcus of the Crimson Sentinels. When his fortress monastery fell 1,111 years ago, the section containing his stasis chamber was sealed by the collapse. Emergency systems activated, routing what little power remained to keep him alive. The tech marines who might have recovered him were dead. The brothers who would have sought him were scattered or slain. The chapter itself, decimated by whatever catastrophe had befallen them, either ceased to exist or withdrew to rebuild, never knowing that one of their ancients remained entombed beneath the rubble of their former home. And so Marcus slept on, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, trapped in darkness and silence, while the galaxy moved on without him. The number 1,111 carries no particular significance in Imperial record keeping. It's simply how long it has been since the fortress fell, how long since Marcus last felt the connection of awakening, how long since any human being has stood in the chamber where his Dreadnought waits. But in the grim darkness of the far future, 1,000 years is nothing. The Imperium has stood for 10,000 years since the Emperor was enthroned upon the Golden Throne. Chapters have existed for millennia. Some Dreadnoughts have slept for periods that make Marcus's imprisonment seem brief by comparison. But that makes it no less tragic. For when a Dreadnought is lost, it's not just a weapon system that's missing. It's a brother, hero, a repository of knowledge and tradition. It's a space marine who gave everything in service to the Emperor and now sleeps alone in the dark, waiting for rescue that will likely never come. This is the reality of the grim darkness of the far future. Even the mightiest warriors can be forgotten, lost to time and circumstance, their sacrifice unremembered, and their service unacknowledged. This is what the Orks have found. Not treasure, though they may think so. Not a prize, though they may treat it as such. They have found tragedy incarnate, a warrior who has already given everything and is about to face one final indignity at the hands of the galaxy's most irreverent Xenos. The nature of Orks, the green tide of the galaxy. If Dreadnoughts represent the tragic nobility of the Imperium, Orks represent something entirely different. They are the antithesis of everything the Space Marines stand for. Where the Adeptus Astartes embodies discipline, honor, and sacrifice, the Orks embody chaos, enthusiasm, and an almost childlike joy in destruction. They are one of the most numerous and successful species in the galaxy, a green tide that sweeps across worlds with the unstoppable momentum of a force of nature. And yet, despite their crude appearance and seemingly primitive culture, they are far more complex and dangerous than they first appear. Orks are not a natural species. They were created, engineered in the distant past by the Old Ones, an ancient race of incredible psychic and technological power. During the War in Heaven, a conflict so old and devastating that its very existence has passed into myth, the Old Ones needed soldiers, warriors who could fight endlessly without the need for complex logistics or supply lines. Warriors who would thrive in the most hostile environments and reproduce rapidly to replace losses. Warriors who were, essentially, the perfect weapon for an endless war. And so they created the Orks, or rather the Krork, the original form of what would eventually become the greenskin menace that plagues the galaxy today. The genius of the Orks' design is evident in every aspect of their biology. They are not born in the traditional sense, but grown from spores. Throughout their lives, and especially at the moment of death, Orks release these spores into the environment. The spores germinate in the soil, developing into a fungal organism that produces the entire orkoid ecosystem. First come the squigs, small creatures that serve as food and sometimes as living weapons or tools. Then the snotlings, tiny greenskins that tend the fungus and squigs. Next are the Gretchen, larger than snotlings, but still smaller than true orks, who serve as laborers and often as cannon fodder. Finally, from the largest and most mature of the fungal growths, emerge the orks themselves. This method of reproduction makes orks incredibly difficult to exterminate. Even if you kill every ork on a planet, the spores they've released will eventually produce a new generation, decades or even centuries after an ork wag has been defeated. Worlds can find themselves facing feral ork tribes emerging from the wilderness, the descendants of spores released during the original invasion. It's a deliberate feature of their design, ensuring that the orks would never truly be wiped out, that there would always be more warriors ready to fight in the endless war their creators intended them for. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of ork biology is their latent psychic ability. Individual orks are not powerful psychers. They can't throw psychic lightning or read minds or perform the feats that an elder warlock might accomplish with ease. But collectively, orks generate a gestalt psychic field known as the Warg. This field grows stronger as more orks gather together and as they engage in activities they enjoy, primarily fighting. The Warg affects the ork psyche in numerous ways, allowing them to instinctively recognize which ork is the biggest and therefore in charge. Size equals authority in ork society, and the wag reinforces this, creating a natural hierarchy based purely on physical dominance. More remarkably, the wag field can actually affect reality in subtle ways. This is where we get into the truly bizarre aspect of ork technology. Ork weapons and vehicles look like they shouldn't work. They're cobbled together from scrap metal, held together with rivets and prayers, and often lacking crucial components that any human engineer would consider essential. And yet, in the hands of an ork, they function, sometimes brilliantly. An ork shooter might be little more than a metal tube with a firing mechanism, but when an ork pulls the trigger, it spits bullets with deadly accuracy. An ork truck might look like it's held together with rust and wishful thinking, but it'll rumble across the battlefield, belching smoke and carrying its cargo of eager boys into the fight. The Adeptus Mechanicus has theorized that this is due to the telekinetic or quantum probabilistic effects of the WAG field. The orks believe their technology works, and so it does, at least to a degree. There's debate about how much of this is psychic influence and how much is simply that ork technology is far cruder and more resilient than it appears, able to function despite damage and poor maintenance that would cripple more sophisticated systems. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Ork weapons will work for humans if captured, though they're unreliable and poorly made compared to Imperial equipment. But there's no denying that some Ork technology seems to defy conventional physics, operating on principles that only make sense when you remember that the Orks genuinely believe it should work. This belief extends to color. Orks are convinced that red vehicles go faster, and within the bounds of their psychic field, they often do. Yellow explosions are bigger, blue is lucky, purple is sneaky, to the point where there's a joke among Imperial commanders that no one has ever seen a purple Ork because they're so sneaky. It sounds ridiculous, and in any other context it would be. But this is Warhammer 40,000, where belief and reality blur in the presence of the warp, and the Orks' collective psychic field is strong enough to make their expectations manifest in reality, at least to a limited degree. Ork society is dominated by violence, but it's a strangely organized violence. Orks are divided into clans, each with its own culture and preferences. The Goths are brutal close combat specialists who favor black and prefer to settle disputes with their fists. The Bad Moons are the wealthiest Orks, their teeth growing faster than others, giving them more currency in Ork society, where teeth serve as money. The Evil Sons are obsessed with speed, painting everything red and racing into battle on bikes and in vehicles. The Death Skulls are looters and scavengers, known for their blue color scheme and their tendency to liberate anything that isn't nailed down, and even things that are. The Blood Axes are the closest thing Orks have to tactical thinkers, willing to use camouflage and even retreat if it means winning in the end. And the Snakebites are traditionalists who prefer to fight with chopper and slugger rather than fancy technology. Within these clans, Orks specialize based on their genetic programming. The Odd Boys are Orks born with specific knowledge encoded in their DNA, allowing them to perform specialized roles. Mech Boys understand technology at an instinctive level, able to build and repair complex machinery without formal training. They're the ones who create the ramshackle but effective weapons and vehicles that Ork warbands rely on. Pain Boys are the Ork equivalent of doctors, though their methods are more likely to involve power saws and welding torches than anything resembling modern medicine. They perform brutal surgeries, augment Orks with mechanical parts, and generally keep the warband functional through sheer bloody-minded determination. Weird Boys are Orks who are psychically sensitive, able to channel the WAG energy into devastating psychic attacks. They're often unstable, driven half-mad by the constant psychic pressure generated by nearby Orks, and they have a tendency to explode if they build up too much energy without releasing it. Runthirds manage the Gretchen and Snotlings, keeping them in line and directing them to useful work. And then there are the various types of warrior Orks. Nobs are large Orks who lead mobs of boys. War bosses are even larger, the biggest and strongest Orks in the warband, whose authority comes from their ability to bash anyone who questions them. The very largest and most successful war bosses can become warlords, commanding not just a warband, but an entire WAG. A WAG is the ultimate expression of Ork culture. It's a mass migration, a holy crusade, a looting expedition, and a pub brawl all rolled into one. Glorious, violent package. When a war boss becomes powerful enough and his reputation spreads far enough, Orks from across the sector and beyond will flock to join him. The WAG grows, drawing in more and more Orks, their collective psychic field strengthening with every addition. Mech Boys work together on increasingly ambitious projects, building war machines of staggering size. Planets are invaded, their populations enslaved or destroyed, their resources stripped to fuel the WAG's advance. And as long as the WAG keeps winning, keeps fighting, it grows stronger and more unstoppable. The psychology of Orks is simple but effective. They live to fight. Fighting is what they're designed for, what they're good at, and what they genuinely enjoy. An orc doesn't see combat as a necessary evil or a last resort. Combat is entertainment, opportunity, and purpose all rolled into one. The louder, more chaotic, and more violent the fight, the better. This doesn't mean orcs are mindless, berserkers. They're capable of tactical thinking, especially the more intelligent orcs like war bosses and certain clans. But their default response to most problems is violence, and it's served them well for millions of years. And this brings us to one of the most important aspects of orc culture: looting. Orcs love to loot. They loot everything: weapons, armor, vehicles, buildings, even entire factories if they can manage it. The practice is so ingrained in their society that there's an entire clan, the Death Skulls, dedicated to it. But every orc engages in looting to some degree. It's not just practical, though having more and better equipment is always useful. It's fun. Finding something valuable, claiming it for yourself, and then showing it off to the other boys is a source of genuine pride and satisfaction for an orc. When orcs loot Imperial equipment, they invariably modify it. Partly this is practical. A Space Marine bolter is too small for an orc's massive hands, so it needs to be enlarged. An Imperial tank's fire control systems are too complex for orc sensibilities, so they get ripped out and replaced with something simpler. But mostly, orcs modify looted equipment because they want to make it more orky. They weld on spikes and armor plates. They paint it in their clan's colors. They add more weapons, because you can never have too much dakka. They install louder engines, because quiet is for sneaky gits. The end result is something that barely resembles the original, but serves the orcs' purposes perfectly. This brings us to Skragbad Metal Compa's warband and their discovery of the Dreadnought. Skragbad is a typical war boss in many ways. He's massive, standing well over 3 meters tall and built like a tank. His body is covered in scars from countless fights, and his left arm has been replaced with a power claw by one of his pain boys after he lost the original in a fight with a Chaos champion. He's not the smartest orc around, but he's cunning enough to have united several smaller warbands under his leadership and maintain control through a combination of charisma and the willingness to smash anyone who challenges him. His warband includes several mech boys, the most prominent being Big Nuts, so named because he once built a deaf dread using nuts and bolts the size of a Gretchen's head. Big Nuts is typical of his kind, brilliant in his own limited way, completely insane by human standards, and utterly fearless when it comes to experimenting with dangerous technology. He's the one who will ultimately decide what to do with the Dreadnought, though Skragbad's authority means the final decision rests with him. The warband also includes a mob of looters, Orks, who specialize in scavenging the best weapons from the battlefield, and hundreds of boys eager for a fight and whatever loot might be found in the ruins. When news of the Dreadnought's discovery reaches Skragbad, his response is immediate and enthusiastic. A Space Marine walker. Thing? That's exactly the kind of loot that makes a warboss's reputation. The other warbosses will be so jealous when they hear about it. And if they can get it working, imagine the fun they'll have stomping around in it, crushing everything in their path. This is the kind of find that makes an orc's decade, maybe even his century. So Skragbad gathers his mech boys, bellows for his knobs to clear the way, and heads into the ruins to see this prize for himself. The Slumber. 1,111 years of darkness. For brother Captain Marcus, there is no sense of time passing. The stasis field holds him in perfect suspension, consciousness completely suppressed. All biological processes slowed to the barest minimum necessary to sustain life. In this state, 1,000 years might as well be a single heartbeat. There are no dreams in true stasis, no awareness of self or surroundings. There is simply nothing, an absolute void where even the concept of waiting has no meaning. This is both the mercy and the horror of stasis sleep. It preserves the mind by removing it entirely from the experience of time, but it also means that when awakening comes, it will be without warning and without any sense of how long has passed. The last thing Marcus remembers, the final moments before the stasis field activated, was the aftermath of battle. The fortress monastery was burning. The enemy, whoever they were, the details are already fading from his memory, had breached the inner sanctum. He had led the defense of the armory level, his Dreadnought's assault cannon cutting down wave after wave of attackers. But there were too many, always too many. His brothers were falling around him, and he could hear the Vox channels filling with desperate calls for reinforcement that would never come. Then came the impact. Something massive, probably an orbital bombardment or the explosion of the fortress's own reactors, struck the section he was defending. The ceiling came down, tons of rockcrete and steel, collapsing in a thunderous roar that overwhelmed even the din of battle. His Dreadnought systems registered damage, critical failures cascading through multiple systems. Power levels dropping, locomotion compromised, weapons offline. And then, as emergency systems activated and began the shutdown sequence, a final thought. He had failed. The fortress was lost. His brothers were dying, and he was going into stasis without knowing if any of them would survive to wake him again. That was 1,111 years ago, though Marcus has no way of knowing this. The stasis field activated exactly as designed, drawing on the Dreadnought's auxiliary power cells to maintain the field and the minimal life support necessary to keep the Space Marine within alive. The systems are robust, built by tech Marines who understood that a Dreadnought might need to operate for centuries or even millennia. As long as power remained, the stasis would hold. As long as the sarcophagus remained sealed, the life support would function. The machine would wait, patient and silent, for the day when someone would come to wake its occupant. But that day never came. In the immediate aftermath of the fortress's fall, the survivors of the Crimson Sentinels had more pressing concerns than searching through thousands of tons of rubble for a single lost Dreadnought. The chapter was decimated, its strength reduced to a handful of scattered companies. The chapter master was dead, most of the senior leadership lost in the final defense. The remaining Space Marines evacuated what they could salvage, withdrew to a secondary base, and began the long, painful process of rebuilding. They knew that Dreadnoughts had been lost in the collapse. It was one of many tragedies they would have to accept, but with limited resources and more immediate threats to face, excavating the ruins was deemed impractical. Perhaps later, when the chapter was stronger, they could return. Perhaps. The years turned to decades. The Crimson Sentinels rebuilt, recruited new initiates, forged new traditions to replace those lost with the fortress. The veterans who had known Marcus personally grew old and died, their gene seed harvested to create new Space Marines who would never know the hero entombed beneath the rubble of a fortress they had never seen. Decades turned to centuries. The chapter moved on, found a new homeworld, established a new fortress monastery. The old fortress was forgotten, just another ruin on a planet that had been abandoned as strategically irrelevant. If the Crimson Sentinels still existed as a chapter, if they hadn't been absorbed by another chapter, or lost to some other calamity, they had no reason to remember the world where their ancestors had fallen. Centuries turned to a millennium. The Imperium turned its attention to other threats. New wars erupted across the galaxy. Entire sectors fell to chaos or Xenos invasion and were reconquered at terrible cost. The planet where Marcus slept became just another entry in the Administratum's endless records, marked as uninhabited and of no strategic value. No ships visited, no Imperial forces patrolled its space. It was forgotten, just one more world among millions in the vast Imperium, its history lost to the vagaries of time and bureaucratic indifference. But through it all, the Dreadnought systems continued to function. The power cells, designed to last for centuries, slowly depleted. First, the non-essential systems went dark. Environmental sensors, unnecessary in the sealed chamber, shut down to conserve power. External Vox systems, with no one to communicate with, fell silent. The Dreadnought's weapons, already damaged in the collapse, were placed into the deepest standby mode. One by one, systems that weren't absolutely necessary for maintaining stasis and life support were deactivated, routing every available watt of power to the sarcophagus and its precious cargo. By the time Skragbad's warband arrived on the planet, the Dreadnought was running on the barest minimum of power. Another century, perhaps two, and the cells would have been exhausted, the stasis field would have failed, life support would have ceased, and Marcus would have died, finally and truly, still trapped in his metal tomb, never knowing how long he had slept, or why no one had come to wake him. It would have been a quiet death, peaceful even, as consciousness simply faded away without ever returning. Perhaps, in the grim calculus of the 41st millennium, that would have been the better fate. But the Orks changed that. Their excavation of the ruins, driven by nothing more than greed and curiosity, unsealed the chamber where Marcus had slept for over a millennium. Fresh air rushed in, carrying with it the sounds of the outside world for the first time in 11 centuries. The Dreadnought's environmental sensors, detecting the change in atmosphere, attempted to activate and found that they had insufficient power. Emergency protocols engaged, trying to assess the situation, determine if this was a rescue by friendly forces or some new threat. But with most systems offline, all the Dreadnought could do was wait in the darkness and hope. The wait wouldn't be long. Bignut's mechboy and his assistants are nothing if not efficient when it comes to examining interesting technology. They approach the Dreadnought with the casual irreverence that characterizes Ork interaction with everything. To them, this is just another piece of equipment to be examined, taken apart if necessary, and possibly repurposed for their own use. They have no concept of the sacred nature of what they're looking at, no understanding that this machine houses a warrior who has served the Emperor for centuries. They see metal, weapons, and the potential for a really good time if they can get it working. Bignuts walks around the Dreadnought, his mechanical eye, a crude augmetic he installed himself after losing. His original eye to a particularly enthusiastic Gretchen with a welding torch, whirring as it focuses on different aspects of the machine. He's seen Imperial walkers before. His warband looted a sentinel during a raid on an Imperial guard depot, and they've fought against Space Marine dreadnoughts in the past, though usually at a distance and usually while retreating, because those things are terrifying when they're fully operational. But he's never had the chance to examine one up close like this, to really see how it works. What Bignut sees impresses him. The armor is thick, far thicker than what the Orks typically use. The weapons, even damaged and inactive, are clearly powerful. An assault cannon on one arm, the barrels cold but promising tremendous dakka when operational. A power fist on the other, massive and brutal, clearly designed for crushing enemy vehicles and smashing through fortifications. The whole thing is covered in purity seals, those weird pieces of parchment that the Humies seem to love putting on everything, and there are markings that probably mean something to someone who can read Humie script. But what really catches Bignuts' attention is the sarcophagus. That's clearly the heart of the machine, the part that controls everything else. He doesn't understand exactly how it works, not yet. But his instincts as a mech boy tell him that if he wants to get this thing moving, that's where he needs to start. He orders a couple of his assistants to start clearing the debris around the Dreadnought's legs while he climbs up to get a better look at the control systems. Gretchen scurry around, following his barked orders, carrying tools and components salvaged from other projects. This is the moment of greatest danger for Marcus, though he's unaware of it. The Dreadnought's automated systems are sophisticated enough to recognize that someone is interfering with the machine, but without power to activate defenses or even send a warning, all they can do is continue their primary function, keeping the occupant alive. But Orks are not known for their gentle touch. When Bignut starts trying to access the Dreadnought's control systems, he doesn't use a delicate touch or sophisticated hacking equipment. He uses a crowbar, a welding torch, and the kind of enthusiastic problem-solving that has resulted in more than one mech boy accidentally blowing himself up. The armored panels that protect the Dreadnought's control systems are designed to resist enemy fire and sabotage. They're not designed to resist an Ork mech boy with a power tool and complete disregard for the concept of careful. Big Nut starts prying at the panels, looking for access points, while his assistants work on other sections of the machine. Sparks fly as they cut through cables they think aren't important. Warning lights that haven't illuminated in centuries begin to flicker as power is interrupted and rerouted through damaged systems. And deep within the sarcophagus, suspended in amniotic fluid, connected to the machine through neural interfaces that have kept him alive for over a millennium, Brother Captain Marcus begins to wake. The Ork discovery. First contact with the ancient. The invasion of the planet by Skragbad's warband had been, by Ork standards, disappointingly easy. The human population was scattered, poorly defended, and offered almost no resistance worth bragging about. A few Imperial Guard units had tried to make a stand at the planetary capital, but they were swept aside in a tide of green fury that left the city burning and its defenders scattered to the winds. For the boys in Skragbad's mob, it was barely worth the effort of loading their shooters. They wanted a proper fight, not target practice against scared humies who barely knew which end of a laser gun to point at the enemy. So when the scouts reported finding ancient ruins that bore the marks of the Adeptus Astartes no less, the entire warband's enthusiasm ratcheted up several notches. Space Marine ruins meant the possibility of real loot. Power armor, if they could find any intact. Weapons that actually worked properly instead of the jury-rigged monstrosities they usually had to make do with. Maybe even intact vehicles, or, if they were really lucky, some of that fancy technology the Beakies hoarded like dragons sitting on piles of gold. The excavation begins with all the subtlety of an orbital bombardment. Explosives are planted with more enthusiasm than precision, blasting away at the rubble. Looted Imperial construction equipment, painted red to make it work faster and covered in crude Ork glyphs, tears into the collapsed sections. Gretchen are sent crawling through narrow gaps, squealing in terror as sections of rubble shift and threaten to crush them. More than a few Gretchen don't make it out, but that's just the cost of doing business in an Ork warband. There are always more Gretchen. The first real discovery comes when they break into what was clearly an armory. The weapons are long gone, either taken when the fortress fell or degraded to uselessness by centuries of exposure, but the racks and storage units suggest this place once held significant firepower. Skragbad himself leads the exploration of this section, his massive frame barely fitting through the doorways designed for Space Marines. He's hoping to find something spectacular, maybe one of those huge guns the Beakies mount on their vehicles, or a suit of Terminator armor he could have his mech boys convert into something he could wear. Instead, it's a Gretchen who makes the discovery that will change everything. Snickgit, fleeing from a larger Gretchen who's trying to steal his loot, squeezes through a crack that's too small for the bigger creature to follow. He finds himself in a chamber that somehow remained sealed despite the devastation around it. The air is stale, ancient, untouched for longer than any Gretchen could possibly comprehend. And there, standing, in the center of the chamber, like a statue in a forgotten shrine, is the Dreadnought. Snickgit's first reaction is pure terror. The thing is huge, easily 3 times his height, and even motionless it radiates menace. The weapons alone are larger than he is, and the armor looks thick enough to stop anything short of a direct hit from a battle cannon. His instinct screams at him to run, to get away from this dangerous thing before it wakes up and decides to stomp him flat. But Gretchen are also, by necessity, incredibly curious. They have to be, to survive in a society where the strong regularly use the weak as convenient projectiles or impromptu testing subjects for new weapons. So Snickgit edges closer, his beady eyes taking in every detail. The machine isn't moving. No lights are blinking on its surface. No sound emerges from it. It's just there, silent and still as a statue. And where most would see a dormant threat, Snickgit sees opportunity. If he can be the one to report this, fine to the big mech, or, even better, to Skragbad himself, the reward could be significant. Maybe he'd get extra rations. Maybe he'd be assigned to a safer duty, somewhere away from the boys who like to use Gretchen as target practice. He taps the Dreadnought's armored leg with a piece of scrap metal he's carrying. The metal rings against the ceramite with a dull thunk, but nothing else happens. Emboldened, Snikgit climbs up onto the machine's foot, using the various protrusions and armor plates as handholds. Up close, he can see more details. The purity seals, so many of them, each one carefully placed and sealed with wax that has long since hardened to stone. The chapter heraldry, faded but still visible, showing a crimson shield with a sword and torch crossed behind it. The nameplate, written in high Gothic script that Snikgit can't read, but recognizes as the kind of fancy writing the Humies use for important things. The Gretchen's squealing as he explores the Dreadnought attracts others of his kind. Soon there's a small mob of Gretchens swarming over the machine, poking at everything, trying to find anything loose that might be valuable. They're careful not to damage anything too obviously, because if this thing is as important as it looks, whoever finds it will want it intact. But they can't resist the urge to investigate, to see what this strange machine might contain. It's this commotion that eventually draws the attention of the Orks. A knob, investigating why the Gretchen are making so much noise, squeezes through the crack and sees what they've found. His eyes widen, and for a moment he just stares. Then a huge grin splits his brutal features. This is the kind of find that legends are made of. He immediately sends a runner to fetch Scragbad and the mech boys, knowing that the war boss will want to see this personally. When Scragbad Metal Compass squeezes into the chamber, followed by Big Nuts and several other mech boys, the reaction is immediate and enthusiastic. Scragbad lets out a bellow of triumph that echoes through the ruins, scattering Gretchen in all directions and nearly deafening everyone in the confined space. This is exactly the kind of loot he was hoping for. A real Space Marine Dreadnought, apparently intact, just sitting here waiting for someone to claim it. The other war bosses are going to be so jealous when they hear about this. Big Nuts' reaction is more analytical, but no less enthusiastic. He circles the Dreadnought, his mechanical eye whirring and clicking as he examines it from every angle. He's never had a chance to really study one of these things up close. Sure, he's seen them in battle, usually while they were trying to kill him, but that's very different from having one just sitting there, inactive and available for detailed examination. His mind is already racing with possibilities. If they can get this thing working, they could have their own Stompy Walker. Better than a Def Dread, because this was made by the Humies with all their fancy technology. The first challenge, Big Nuts realizes, is figuring out how to activate it. The machine is clearly in some kind of standby mode. There's no sound of power systems running, no lights indicating active status, nothing that suggests it's ready to move. But it's also clearly not completely dead. The armor is intact, the structure is sound, and there are faint indicators that some minimal power might still be flowing through its systems. He needs to find the control systems, figure out how to interface with them, and see if he can bring the thing back to operational status. Scragbad, meanwhile, is already planning how to use their new acquisition. If they can get it working, he'll lead from the front in this beast, crushing the enemy beneath its metal feet. He can already imagine the looks on the other war bosses' faces when they see him stomping around in a looted Dreadnought. Maybe he'll paint it red to make it go faster, or blue for luck, or maybe a combination, red with blue stripes. The other boys will be so impressed. But first, they need to get it out of this chamber and back to their base where Big Nuts can really work on it. This means clearing the debris from the entrance, which means more explosives and more heavy equipment. Scragbad starts bellowing orders, sending Orks running in all directions to fetch what's needed. The Gretchen, seeing the Orks get to work, wisely make themselves scarce. This is about to get loud, dangerous, and potentially explosive, and Gretchen have a finely honed sense of when to be elsewhere. What none of them realize is that their very presence, their noise and movement and enthusiastic destruction of the surrounding area is triggering responses in the Dreadnought's systems. The machine's sensors, even with minimal power, can detect vibration and sound. The external sensors are registering movement. something the automated systems haven't experienced in over a millennium. Emergency protocols begin to evaluate the situation. Is this a rescue? An attack? The systems lack sufficient data to make a determination, but one thing is clear: the stasis sleep is being disturbed. Power that has been carefully hoarded for centuries is being diverted to bring more systems online, to try to assess the situation and determine the appropriate response. And then, Bignuts makes his first major mistake. In his eagerness to access the control systems, he uses a cutting torch to breach one of the armored panels protecting the Dreadnought's primary power routing. It's a crude approach, but Bignuts isn't known for subtlety. The panel comes free with a screech of tortured metal, revealing a maze of cables and conduits beneath. Most of them are dark, inactive, but a few show the faint glow of power still flowing through them. Bignuts reaches in, his massive fingers surprisingly deft as he traces the power conduits, trying to figure out which ones are important and which ones he can safely cut to, access the systems beneath. He's so focused on his work that he doesn't notice the change in the Dreadnought's status. The sarcophagus, sealed for over 1100 years, begins to emit a low, barely audible hum as systems that have been dormant for centuries start to come online. Warning runes that haven't lit in more than a millennium begin to glow with a faint, baleful light. Deep within the armored shell, in the cold embrace of the amniotic fluid, Brother Captain Marcus's consciousness begins to stir. It's not a gentle awakening. There's no gradual return to awareness, no slow emergence from sleep. One moment there is nothing, the absolute void of stasis sleep. The next, there is sensation, pain, confusion, the overwhelming disorientation of neural pathways that have been dormant for centuries suddenly flooding with input. The connection to the Dreadnought systems is still there, still functional, and through it comes a rush of data that Marcus's brain struggles to process. Damage reports, critical systems offline, power at minimal levels, external tampering detected, unknown forces attempting to access control systems. The date is wrong. It can't be right. The chronometer must be malfunctioning. It says 1,111 years have passed since he entered stasis. That's impossible. That has to be an error. But even as his mind rejects the information, another part of him, the part that has fought in countless battles and learned to trust the Dreadnought systems, knows it's true. He's been asleep for over a millennium. His chapter, his brothers, everyone he knew is almost certainly dead. The fortress is gone, and someone, something, is trying to break into his Dreadnought. Through the external sensors, damaged and barely functional but still providing some data, he can detect movement, multiple contacts. Size and configuration suggest Orks. The realization hits him like a physical blow. After sleeping for over 1,000 years, he's woken up to find himself in the hands of the Emperor's enemies. The Xenos filth that have plagued the Imperium since before the Great Crusade. And they're trying to disassemble him like he's nothing more than scrap metal to be looted. Marcus tries to move, to activate the Dreadnought's systems and defend himself, but nothing responds. Power levels are too low. The weapons are offline. Even basic locomotion is impossible with the current power available. He's trapped, helpless, able to sense what's happening around him, but unable to do anything about it. For a space marine, for a warrior who has never known defeat, this is perhaps the worst fate imaginable. Not death, which would be a clean end, but impotence. The knowledge that he's at the mercy of the enemy and can do nothing to resist. Outside the sarcophagus, Bignuts continues his work, oblivious to the changes happening within the machine. He's found what he thinks is the main power conduit and is tracing it, back to see if he can figure out where the Dreadnought's power source is located. If he can access that, maybe he can route more power to the systems and get this thing moving. It never occurs to him that he might be waking something that would very much like to kill him and everyone else in the chamber. Ork engineering attempts, looting the Ancient. The process of getting the Dreadnought out of the sealed chamber and back to the Orks' base camp is a masterpiece of chaotic engineering that would make any tech priest weep in despair. First, the entrance has to be widened. This is accomplished through the generous application of explosives, with Orks placing charges with more enthusiasm than precision. The resulting detonation brings down another section of ceiling, nearly crushing several Gretchen who were too slow to get out of the way. But it does create an opening large enough to move the Dreadnought through. Next comes the actual extraction. The Dreadnought weighs several tons, farthest, too heavy for even the strongest Orks to simply carry. So they rig up a system of pulleys and cables, using equipment looted from Imperial construction sites and adapted with the kind of creative engineering that only Orks would consider safe. The Dreadnought is wrapped in chains, cables are attached to strategic points, and a team of Gretchen is put to work operating the pulleys while Orks supervise with liberal applications of shouting and the occasional boot to encourage faster work. The journey through the ruins is slow and nerve-wracking, at least for those Gretchen responsible for ensuring the Dreadnought doesn't topple over and crush them. The Orks treat it like a parade, bellowing and cheering as they maneuver their prize through corridors and over piles of rubble. More than once, the Dreadnought tips dangerously, held upright only by frantic scrambling from the Gretchen operating the support lines. Through it all, Marcus remains conscious, experiencing every jolt and impact, through the Dreadnought's sensors, unable to do anything but endure the indignity of being hauled around like a piece of cargo. When they finally reach the Orks' base camp, a sprawling collection of scrap metal structures and looted Imperial equipment spread across what was once a landing field, Scragbad orders the Dreadnought placed in the center of the Mechboy workshop. This workshop is a massive tent made from salvaged tarpaulins and armor plates, filled with workbenches covered in tools, half-finished projects, and mysterious bits of technology that may or may not explode at any moment. It's here that Big Nuts and his fellow Mechboys will attempt to figure out how to make the Dreadnought operational. The first step, in Big Nuts' mind, is to get more power to the machine. Whatever it's running on now, it's clearly not enough. The Dreadnought systems are barely responding, and getting it to move will require significantly more energy, so he sets about trying to find the power source. This proves more challenging than expected. The Dreadnought's internal layout is not intuitive, at least not to an Ork, and many of the access panels are sealed in ways that resist his attempts to open them. Big Nuts' solution is characteristically direct. He gets a bigger crowbar and a heavier hammer. The sounds of metal being pried and beaten echo through the workshop as he systematically works his way around the Dreadnought, opening access panels and examining the systems within. Some of what he finds makes sense to him. Power conduits, clearly labeled and routed in logical patterns. Hydraulic systems for the limbs, similar in principle to what Orks use in their own walkers. Ammunition feeds for the weapons, though the weapons themselves are more sophisticated than anything in the Ork arsenal. But much of it is utterly foreign. There are systems whose purpose he can't even begin to guess at. Components that seem to serve no function he can identify. And at the heart of it, all the sarcophagus itself, sealed and protected by layers of armor and security systems that he doesn't yet know how to bypass. He can tell that's where the real controls are, where the Humi must have sat to operate this thing. If he can get into that, he might be able to figure out how to make the whole Dreadnought respond to commands. While Big Nuts works on the technical challenge, other Orks start suggesting improvements. This is where Ork culture really comes into play. To an Ork, nothing is ever finished. Everything can be improved, made bigger, louder, more Orky. One knob suggests adding more armor plates, making it even tougher. Another wants to replace the assault cannon with a bigger gun, maybe one of those big shooters they pulled off a looted Imperial tank. A third thinks they should paint it red, because red makes things go faster, and a fast Dreadnought would be proper scary. Scragbad, watching the proceedings from his throne, a looted Imperial command chair modified, with extra spikes and a beer holder, encourages all of it. Make it Orky, he orders. Paint it in the warband's colors. Add more weapons. Make it loud. Make it something that will make the other war bosses piss themselves with envy when they see it. The mech boys take these suggestions to heart, and soon the workshop is a frenzy of activity as different orcs work on different improvements. A team of boys starts welding on additional armor plates, crude sheets of metal that they have cut to roughly the right size. These plates are bolted and welded onto the Dreadnought's existing armor, covering the chapter heraldry and purity seals with layers of scrap metal. Another team is working on a paint scheme, mixing up buckets of red, blue, and yellow paint, arguing loudly about what colors should go where. A third team is trying to figure out how to mount additional weapons, looking at the Dreadnought's existing hardpoints and trying to determine if they can add a rocket launcher or maybe a big chopper. Through all of this, Marcus experiences every modification as a violation. These Xeno scum are defiling a sacred war machine of the Adeptus Astartes. They're covering the honors and heraldry of his chapter with crude metal and garish paint. They're treating him, a hero who has served the Emperor for centuries, like a piece of junk to be modified according to their barbaric whims. The rage builds within him, a cold fury that wars with the helplessness of his situation. If he could just get enough power to the weapons systems, just enough to activate the assault cannon for a few seconds, he would teach these Xenos the price of their disrespect. But the power isn't there. The Dreadnought's cells are nearly exhausted, barely maintaining the stasis field that kept him alive and the minimal systems necessary to sustain his remaining organs. Every time the Orks cut into a power conduit or reroute a system, there's a risk that they'll accidentally sever something critical. Marcus has to watch, helpless, as these crude Xenos bumble their way through systems designed by the Mechanicus's finest artificers. Big Nuts, meanwhile, has made a discovery. He's traced the power conduits back to what he thinks is the main power source, a series of sealed compartments deep within the Dreadnought structure. The compartments are heavily armored and protected by security systems that he doesn't understand, but he can tell that whatever is inside is providing the minimal power keeping the machine alive. If he can access those compartments and maybe hook up some additional power sources, he might be able to get this thing moving. His solution involves a combination of cutting torches, explosives, and a complete disregard for safety protocols. He sets about cutting through the armored seals, protecting the power compartments, while his assistants prepare a makeshift power supply, cobbled together from looted Imperial generators and Orc-built capacitors. It's dangerous work. One mistake could cause a massive power surge that might damage the Dreadnought systems or even kill whatever Humi is inside. But Big Nuts is confident in his abilities, and even if something goes wrong, well, that's what Gretchen are for. They can clean up the mess afterward. As the cutting torch bites into the armored seal, Marcus feels the change immediately. Power that has been carefully regulated for over a millennium is suddenly being disrupted. Systems are going offline, rerouted, coming back online in configurations they were never designed for. It's chaos, a storm of conflicting signals and error messages that flood his consciousness through the neural interface. If he were still fully human, it would drive him mad. But he's a space marine, trained to endure unimaginable pain and hardship, and he forces his mind to focus through the chaos. And then something unexpected happens. The Orks' crude power supply, intended to supplement the Dreadnought's depleted cells, is connected to the wrong conduit. Instead of providing auxiliary power, it dumps a massive surge directly into the Dreadnought's main systems. Sparks fly, Gretchen scatter squealing, and for a moment even Big Nuts looks concerned. But the Dreadnought systems, designed to handle far more sophisticated power inputs, automatically route and regulate the surge. Suddenly, for the first time in over a millennium, the Dreadnought has real power flowing through it. Warning klaxons blare as system after system comes online. The assault cannon's ammunition feed cycles with a mechanical clatter. The Power Fist's energy field generator hums to life. Optical sensors that have been dark for centuries flood Marcus's consciousness with visual input, and he sees, truly sees, for the first time since awakening. And what he sees fills him with a rage that transcends anything he felt during his mortal life. Orks, everywhere, crawling over his Dreadnought, defiling it with their crude modifications, their barbaric paint schemes, their complete and utter disregard for the sacred nature of what they found. Gretchen's scurry around his feet, a massive orc, clearly a mech boy, based on the mechanical augmentations and the tools he's carrying, stands right next to the sarcophagus, still working on the power systems. And beyond them, dozens more orcs, Gretchen, even a few larger creatures that might be knobs, or even the war boss himself. Marcus tries to move, and this time, the Dreadnought responds. The response is sluggish, systems still coming online, and power distribution still unbalanced, but it's there. The Dreadnought's right foot shifts, just a few centimeters, but it's enough to make the deck plates groan under the weight. The movement sends Gretchen fleeing in all directions, squealing in terror. Several orcs stop what they're doing and stare at the machine, suddenly realizing that it might not be as inactive as they thought. Bignut's faster on the uptake than his compatriots, understands immediately what's happening. The Hume inside is waking up. The machine is coming online, and they're all standing right next to a fully armed Space Marine Dreadnought that probably doesn't appreciate what they've been doing to it. For perhaps the first time in his career as a mech boy, Bignuts considers the possibility that he may have made a terrible mistake. The awakening. Ancient fury stirs. The sensation of consciousness returning after such an extended period is unlike anything Marcus has experienced before. When he was first entombed in the Dreadnought, the awakening from stasis was disorienting but manageable. He'd slept for weeks at most, sometimes months. The transition from unconsciousness to awareness was smooth, carefully managed by the tech marines who understood the systems and knew how to bring a Dreadnought online without shocking the occupant's consciousness. This is nothing like that. This is a flood, a deluge of sensation and information that crashes into his consciousness with the force of an artillery barrage. Power surges through systems that have been dormant for over a millennium, bringing them online in random sequence. The audio sensors activate first, and suddenly he's assaulted by sound. The orcs' guttural shouting, the mechanical grinding of their crude equipment, the terrified squealing of Gretchen, the industrial clatter of the workshop. It's overwhelming, a cacophony that would drive a baseline human mad. Visual sensors come online next, and the world floods into his perception. The workshop, dim and chaotic, lit by flickering work lights and the glow of welding torches. The orcs, massive green-skinned brutes, crawling over his Dreadnought like vermin on a corpse. The crude modifications they've made. The armor plates welded onto his sacred chassis. The paint they've started applying to cover his chapter's heraldry. Every detail is a fresh wound, a new insult to add to the centuries of service he's rendered. The tactical systems boot up, analyzing the situation with the cold logic of ancient programming. Hostile contacts detected. Multiple Xenos entities, species identified. Orkoid. Threat assessment. Critical. Recommended response. Immediate engagement. Eliminate all hostiles. Secure the perimeter. But the weapon systems are still coming online. Ammunition feeds are cycling but not yet ready. The power distribution is unbalanced, and the Dreadnought's locomotion systems are responding sluggishly after centuries of inactivity. And through it all, Marcus's human consciousness struggles to process what's happening. 1,000 years. He slept for 1,000 years. Everyone he knew is dead. His chapter is gone, either destroyed or changed beyond recognition. The fortress monastery, the place he swore to defend with his life, lies in ruins around him. And he's woken up in the hands of Orks, the brutal Xenos filth that he spent his mortal life fighting against. The rage that fills him is beyond words, beyond thought. It's a primal fury that burns in what remains of his chest, flooding through the neural interface and into the Dreadnought's systems. The machine responds to his fury. The power fist clenches, its energy field crackling to life with a blue-white glow that makes the Gretchen nearest to it flee in panic. The assault cannon's barrels begin to rotate, slowly at first, but gaining speed as the ammunition feed completes its cycle and reports ready status. Warning runes flash across Marcus's perception as the targeting system comes online. painting every orc in the workshop with a red designation marker. Threat, eliminate, purge the Xenos. But something is wrong. The systems aren't responding properly. The power distribution is erratic, surging and dropping in ways it never did before. The left leg's actuators are grinding, metal on metal, the lubricants that kept them smooth having degraded over the centuries. The armor, weakened by age and now further compromised by the Orks' crude modifications, shows stress fractures that weren't there before. The Dreadnought is operational, but it's not in fighting condition. Not yet. It needs time to stabilize, to complete the startup sequence, to reach full combat readiness. Time he doesn't have. Because the Orks, having gotten over their initial surprise, are responding in the way Orks always respond to unexpected threats, with violence. Scragbad is shouting orders, his voice cutting through the chaos of the workshop. The boys who had been working on modifications are dropping their tools and grabbing their weapons. Shooters are being raised, choppers are being drawn, and the knobs are pushing their way through the crowd, eager to join the fight. If Marcus is going to survive this, if he's going to have any chance of escaping and returning to the Imperium, he needs to act now. The decision is instantaneous, driven by over 2 centuries of combat experience, compressed into a consciousness that has never known doubt. The assault cannon opens fire, the heavy shells screaming across the workshop and tearing into the mass of Orks. The noise is deafening, a thunderous roar that drowns out even the Orks bellowing. The shells, each one the size of a human fist, are designed to penetrate tank armor. Against unarmored Orks, they're devastatingly effective. The first burst cuts down 3 boys, literally tearing them apart in explosions of green blood and shattered bone. The Orks' response is immediate and enthusiastic. They charge, not away from the Dreadnought, not seeking cover, but directly at it, roaring their battle cry and firing wildly with their crude weapons. This is what Orks live for, the chance for a proper fight against a dangerous opponent. The fact that they're facing a Space Marine Dreadnought, one of the most formidable individual weapons platforms in the galaxy, doesn't deter them at all. If anything, it makes them more eager. Bullets from Ork shooters patter against the Dreadnought's armor like rain, doing no damage to the thick ceramite. But there are a lot of Orks, and they're all firing, and even armored as he is, Marcus knows he can't simply stand here and take their fire indefinitely. He needs to move, to create space, to use the Dreadnought's superior firepower and armor to methodically eliminate the threat. But when he commands the legs to move, they respond sluggishly. The centuries of inactivity, combined with the damage from the collapse and the Orks' modifications, have compromised the locomotion systems. The first step is agony. Not physical pain, he left that behind when his original body was destroyed, but something worse. The sensation of the machine not responding as it should, of systems failing to execute commands with the precision he needs. The Dreadnought lurches forward, off balance, and Marcus has to fight to keep it from toppling over. Gretchen scatter, crushed beneath the massive feet as he forces the machine to move the Psaork. Targeting systems track moving Orks, painting them with priority markers, and the assault cannon speaks again, cutting down another group of charging boys. Big Nuts, demonstrating the quick thinking that makes him a successful mech boy, doesn't charge. Instead, he runs for the workshop's control panel, where several pieces of heavy equipment are connected to the power grid. If he can cut power to the Dreadnought, maybe he can shut it down before it kills everyone in the workshop. His fingers, surprisingly deft for their size, dance over the controls as he tries to isolate the power feed he'd connected to the Dreadnought. But he's too late. Marcus has already identified the external power source as a vulnerability and rerouted the Dreadnought's systems to draw from its internal cells. The connection to the Ork power supply is severed with a thought, sparks flying as the conduit is forcefully disconnected. It costs him power, dropping the Dreadnought's energy reserves by several %, but it eliminates the risk of the Orks cutting his power and shutting him down. The workshop has descended into complete chaos. Orks are firing wildly, hitting each other as often as they hit the Dreadnought. Gretchen are fleeing in every direction, trampled underfoot by the larger creatures. The power fist sweeps through a group of boys who got too close, the energy field disintegrating their crude armor and crushing their bodies with contemptuous ease. The assault cannon continues its deadly work, each burst cutting down more orcs. But there are so many of them. For every one Marcus kills, two more seem to take its place, drawn by the sound of battle and the promise of a good fight. And then Skragbad himself enters the fray. The massive warboss, towering even over his knobs, charges the Dreadnought with a roar that shakes the air. His power claw, a brutal weapon that crackles with unstable energy, swings at the Dreadnought's torso. Marcus tries to dodge, but the locomotion systems are too slow, too damaged. The power claw connects with the armor plating the Orks had welded on, and the crude metal explodes, torn apart by the weapon's energy field. The impact rocks the Dreadnought, warning runes flashing as sensors detect damage to the outer armor. This is it, Marcus realizes. This is where he makes his stand. After sleeping for over 1,000 years, after waking to find himself alone in a galaxy that has moved on without him, this is where Brother Captain Marcus of the Crimson Sentinels will die. Not with honor, not defending the Emperor's subjects, or holding a critical position against impossible odds, but in a scrap metal workshop, fighting Orks who see him as nothing more than valuable loot. The irony is bitter, but it doesn't matter. All that matters is taking as many of the Xeno's scum with him as possible. The power fist smashes down on Skragbad, but the warboss is fast, faster than anything his size has any right to be. He dodges to the side, and the blow, that would have crushed his skull, instead demolishes the deck plating where he stood a moment before. The power claw swings again, this time at the Dreadnought's arm, and Marcus feels the impact shudder through the machine's frame. Damage warnings multiply across his perception. The assault cannon's ammunition feed is jammed. The left arm's actuators are grinding worse than before. Power is dropping. The end is coming. But then, something unexpected happens. The Wah! Energy that permeates any large gathering of Orks, the Gestalt psychic field that gives them strength and confidence, suddenly shifts. The Orks have been enjoying this fight, loving every minute of the chaos and violence, but they're also starting to realize that they're losing. The workshop floor is littered with their dead. The Dreadnought, damaged as it is, continues to fight with the skill and determination of a space marine who has never known retreat. And deep in their primitive psyche, something stirs. Fear. Not the paralyzing terror that would send a human running, but a recognition that they're facing something truly dangerous, something that might actually kill them all. That moment of hesitation, that fraction of a second when the Ork's enthusiasm wavers, is all Marcus needs. The assault cannon clears its jam, fresh ammunition feeding into the barrels, and he opens fire on full automatic. The stream of shells tears through the workshop, cutting down Orks by the dozen. The power fist sweeps in a wide arc, crushing anything in its path, and for just a moment, the tide begins to turn. But Ork warbands don't give up easily. Skragbad, seeing his boys faltering, does what warbosses do best. He rallies them with sheer force of personality, bellowing orders and insults in equal measure. He grabs a nearby knob and physically throws him at the Dreadnought, the unfortunate Ork's trajectory ending in a bone-crushing impact against the machine's armor. The message is clear: fight or face the warboss's wrath. And given the choice between a Dreadnought that might kill them and a warboss who definitely will, the Orks choose to keep fighting. The battle becomes a brutal, grinding affair. Marcus's ammunition is running low. The Dreadnought's armor, already weakened by age and damage, is accumulating more hits. The power cells that were nearly exhausted when he woke are being drained rapidly by the demands of combat. He's fighting on borrowed time, every second stretching out into an eternity of combat that he knows must eventually end in his defeat. But he's a space marine. He doesn't know how to quit. He doesn't know how to surrender. All he knows is how to fight, how to make the enemy pay for every inch of ground, how to sell his life as dearly as possible. And in the chaos of the workshop, with Orks and Gretchen dying around him and the Dreadnought's systems failing one by one, Brother Captain Marcus embraces the only certainty he has left. He may have slept for 1,000 years. He may have missed the end of his chapter. He may be alone, forgotten, a relic from an age that no longer exists. But he is still a space marine. He is still a weapon in the Emperor's service. And until his last system fails and his consciousness fades forever, he will continue to fight. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, that's all there is. War. Eternal, unending war. The battle. Ork. Warband versus ancient warrior. The workshop has become a charnel house, the floor slick with Ork blood and littered with the bodies of the dead and dying. Gretchen, who haven't fled, are cowering in corners, witnessing a battle that will become the stuff of legend in the warband. Those who survive, at least. The air is thick with smoke from burning equipment and the acrid stench of propellant from the Dreadnought's assault cannon. Warning lights are flashing throughout the structure as power systems overload and mechanical equipment fails under the strain of the battle. Marcus's tactical display is a nightmare of damage warnings and system failures. The assault cannon, after its sustained firing, has overheated and automatically shut down to prevent a catastrophic failure. The weapon is designed for suppressive fire and sustained combat, but not after sitting dormant for over a millennium without maintenance. The barrels are glowing red hot, and the ammunition feed is reporting multiple malfunctions that would require a Tech Marine's attention to properly repair. But the power fist remains operational, and Marcus uses it with brutal efficiency. An Ork knob, bigger than the boys around him and wielding a crude power claw of his own, charges forward with a roar. Marcus doesn't try to dodge. Instead, he steps into the charge, the Dreadnought's weight and momentum combining with the power fist's energy field to deliver a strike that catches the knob square in the chest. The Ork's armor, already crude, simply disintegrates. The knob's body follows a moment later, crushed to pulp by the impact. The Orks respond with their characteristic enthusiasm for violence. A mob of boys armed with choppers swarms around the Dreadnought's legs, hacking at the joints and actuators with their crude blades. Individually, the weapons are almost useless against the ceramite armor. But there are dozens of them, and they're all attacking the same vulnerable points. Warning runes flash as one of the leg actuators takes damage, grinding metal making an ominous sound that Marcus can feel through the machine's frame. He stomps down hard, the Dreadnought's massive foot crushing 2 Orks beneath it with sickening finality. The impact shakes the entire workshop structure, and somewhere overhead, weakened support beams groan under the stress. Marcus sweeps the power fist in a wide arc at ground level, clearing away more of the boys who are trying to disable his legs. Green blood spatters across the Dreadnought's armor, mixing with the crude paint the Orks had applied earlier. Scragbad, Metal Chomper, has learned from watching his boys get slaughtered. The Dreadnought is powerful, but it's also damaged and running on limited power. The Humie inside, whoever he is skilled, but he's also fighting alone against an entire warband. And Orks, while not tactically sophisticated by Imperial standards, understand the basic principle of overwhelming force. If you can't beat an enemy one-on-one, bring more boys. The warboss bellows orders, and more Orks pour into the workshop from the surrounding camp. These aren't just boys, but looters carrying heavy weapons, knobs in their crude mega armor, and even a couple of other mech boys who bring with them improvised weapons designed for taking down heavy armor. Scragbad is committing the full strength of his warband to this fight, recognizing that if they can't stop the Dreadnought now, it will cut through his entire force. Marcus sees them coming through the Dreadnought's optical sensors, and his enhanced mind, even after over a Baisanail. Millennium in stasis immediately begins calculating odds and tactics. He's outnumbered at least 100 to 1. His ammunition is nearly exhausted. His power reserves are dropping rapidly. The Dreadnought's armor has accumulated significant damage, and several critical systems are either malfunctioning or offline entirely. By any reasonable tactical assessment, his situation is hopeless. He should attempt to retreat, to break contact and find a defensible position where he can hold out until Imperial forces arrive. But there are no Imperial forces coming. There is no chapter to send reinforcements. There is no fortress monastery to retreat to. There is only this moment, this fight, and the certainty that he will not surrender. A Space Marine does not yield. A Space Marine does not flee from Xenos scum. A Space Marine fights until victory is achieved or death claims him. And if death is the only possible outcome, then so be it. At least he'll take as many of these Orks with him as possible. The looters open fire first, their heavy weapons spitting shells and rockets at the Dreadnought. Most of the shots miss, Ork marksmanship being notoriously poor, but enough connect to cause damage. A rocket impacts the Dreadnought's right shoulder, exploding against the armor and leaving a scorched crater. Heavy caliber rounds hammer against the chassis, each impact registered by Marcus's sensors as another small degradation of his protection. The armor is holding, but it won't forever. Marcus charges the looters, the Dreadnought's damaged legs grinding and straining as he forces the machine into motion. The Power Fist leads the way, smashing through the crude barricade the looters had set up and crushing the Orks behind it. The assault cannon, its cooling cycle finally complete, comes back online. Marcus doesn't have much ammunition left, maybe 2 or 3 sustained bursts, but he makes them count. The shells tear through the looters, destroying their heavy weapons and the Orks carrying them. But the charge has taken him deeper into the workshop, away from the exit and surrounded on all sides by Orks. Scragbad seizes the opportunity, directing his knobs to cut off Marcus's retreat, while the boys continue their relentless attacks. The workshop is a maze of equipment and structures, and the Orks are using it to their advantage, attacking from multiple directions at once, forcing Marcus to divide his attention and his limited firepower. A mech boy, showing more courage than sense, manages to climb onto the Dreadnought's back. He's carrying some kind of improvised cutting tool, probably designed for salvage work, and he starts trying to cut through the armor protecting the sarcophagus. Marcus can feel the vibration through the Dreadnought's frame, can see through the rear sensors as the tool begins to score the ancient metal. He tries to reach back with the Power Fist, but the arm won't articulate that far, a limitation of the Dreadnought's design that he's suddenly and painfully aware of. Instead, he throws the Dreadnought into a backwards charge, slamming the machine's back against one of the workshop's support pillars. The impact crushes the mech boy, his body pulverized between the Dreadnought's armor and the metal pillar. But it also brings down the pillar, and a section of the workshop's roof comes crashing down, narrowly missing Marcus, but crushing several Orks who were too slow to get out of the way. The collapse creates a moment of chaos, dust and debris filling the air, Orks coughing and stumbling. Marcus uses the confusion to break away, smashing through a wall of the workshop and emerging into the open air of the Ork camp. The fresh air, or what passes for fresh air in an Ork encampment, hits his senses like a revelation. He can see the sky, dark with the approach of night, and in the distance, the ruins of the fortress monastery where he once served. For a moment, just a moment, Marcus allows himself to hope. If he can make it back to the ruins, he might be able to find a defensible position, maybe even find other relics of his chapter, weapons or equipment that could give him an advantage. At the very least, he can choose the ground where he makes his final stand, rather than fighting in the Orks' workshop. But that moment of hope is shattered by Scragbad's roar of fury. The war boss, seeing his prize escaping, charges out of the workshop with his entire warband at his back. And now Marcus can see the true scale of what he's facing. It's not just the Orks from the workshop. It's hundreds of them, maybe thousands, drawn by the sound of fighting and the promise of a good scrap. The entire camp is mobilizing, Orks grabbing weapons and piling into vehicles, all of them converging on the Dreadnought. This is the reality of fighting Orks. Kill one and 2 more appear. Win one battle and 10 more enemies come running, eager for their turn at combat. They're endless, unstoppable, and they live for this. For them, this isn't a tragedy or a desperate fight for survival. It's entertainment. It's the best kind of fun an Ork can have. Marcus doesn't waste time on fear or despair. Emotions like that are luxuries he can't afford. Instead, He does what Space Marines have done for 10,000 years. He evaluates the tactical situation and acts. The Dreadnought's power reserves are at 20% and dropping. The assault cannon has maybe one more sustained burst before it's completely out of ammunition. The power fist is still operational, but the arm's actuators are grinding badly and may fail at any moment. The legs are barely functional, one of the knee joints partially seized from damage and age. He has, by his calculations, perhaps 5 minutes of combat capability remaining before catastrophic systems failure. 5 minutes to kill as many Orks as possible, to make them pay for what they've done, to show them the fury of a Space Marine who has nothing left to lose. 5 minutes to leave, a mark on this world that will be remembered, even if no one survives to tell the tale. The assault cannon speaks for the last time, shells tearing through the first wave of Orks charging toward him. He sweeps the fire across their ranks, cutting down dozens before the weapon clicks empty and falls silent forever. The power fist follows, crushing skulls and breaking bodies as he wades into the green tide. Around him, Orks are dying, but they're also inflicting damage. Choppers hack at his legs. Shooters pour fire into his armor. Rockets and crude grenades explode against his chassis. And through it all, Marcus fights on. Because that's what Space Marines do. They fight, in the service of the Emperor, until death claims them or victory is achieved. There is no middle ground, no compromise, no surrender. There is only war, eternal and unending, and the grim determination to sell their lives as dearly as possible in the Emperor's name. The power reserves drop to 10%, then 5%. Warning klaxons are sounding throughout the Dreadnought, systems shutting down one by one to preserve the last remaining power for life support. The Dreadnought's movements are becoming sluggish. Marcus's will barely able to force the dying machine to respond to his commands. But still, he fights. Still, he kills. And in his last moments of consciousness, as power finally fails and the world begins to fade to black, Brother Captain Marcus of the Crimson Sentinels allows himself one final thought. He served. For over 1,300 years, across battles and centuries, he served the Emperor. He fought until the very end, never yielding, never compromising, never turning away from his duty. And if this is where it ends, in a nameless Ork camp on a forgotten world, at least he went down fighting. At least he maintained the honor of the Adeptus Astartes to his final breath. At least he died as he lived, as a Space Marine. Potential outcomes and scenarios. The battle between Marcus's Dreadnought and Scragbad's warband represents a fascinating collision of different possible futures, each one reflecting the grim and often arbitrary nature of warfare in the 41st millennium. The ultimate outcome depends on countless variables: the exact state of the Dreadnought's systems, the number of Orks Scragbad can bring to bear, whether the noise of combat attracts other forces in the area, and perhaps most importantly, sheer luck. Let's explore the most likely scenarios and their implications. The first, and perhaps most grimly satisfying outcome from a narrative perspective, is Marcus's last stand, resulting in his final death. In this scenario, the Dreadnought fights until its power cells are completely exhausted, taking dozens or even hundreds of Orks with it, before finally becoming a silent, lifeless monument to Space Marine determination. Scragbad's warband would be significantly weakened by the casualties, potentially vulnerable to counterattack if any Imperial forces were in the system. The Dreadnought's sarcophagus, once it was finally breached, would reveal the shriveled remains of a Space Marine who served for over 1,300 years, his gene seed likely unrecoverable after so long in stasis. For Marcus, this ending would be tragic but appropriate. He would die as a Space Marine should, in battle against the Emperor's enemies, never yielding despite impossible odds. The fact that no one would remember his sacrifice, that no record would exist of his final stand, only adds to the grim darkness of the setting. In the Imperium of man, Heroes die in forgotten corners of the galaxy every day, their sacrifices unrecorded and unmourned. Marcus would simply be one more name that should have been in the records of the honored dead, but was instead lost to time and circumstance. The second possibility is that Marcus's dreadnought is disabled, but he survives. Perhaps the power systems fail before he sustains lethal damage to the sarcophagus. Perhaps the Orks, recognizing that they're taking heavy casualties, back off and decide to try a different approach. In this scenario, Marcus would find himself once again imprisoned in a non-functional dreadnought, conscious but unable to move, forced to watch as the Orks examine their prize and decide what to do with it. This might actually be the worst outcome for Marcus personally. To wake after 1,000 years only to become a prisoner, aware but helpless, watching Orks defile the sacred machine that has been his body for so long. The psychological torture would be immense, especially for a space marine conditioned to always be in control, to always be fighting. He would be reduced to little more than an observer, unable to act, unable to resist, forced to endure whatever the Orks decide to do with him. The Orks' treatment of a captured dreadnought would depend largely on whether they realize there's a living being inside. If they don't, they might simply dismantle it for parts, killing Marcus in the process, probably without even realizing they've done so. But if they do realize there's someone inside, things get more complicated. Orks have been known to keep prisoners, especially valuable ones, though their treatment of those prisoners tends to be brutal by human standards. They might try to force Marcus to operate the dreadnought for them, not understanding that he can't function without proper power and support systems. Or, in a particularly dark turn, they might give the dreadnought to one of their mech boys to study and potentially replicate. Imagine the horror of being unable to move while crude Ork hands dissect the systems that keep you alive, each cut and modification risking catastrophic failure. Marcus would be acutely aware of every violation, every desecration, powerless to stop it. It would be a living nightmare that could last weeks, months, or even years before the Orks finally made a mistake that killed him. The third scenario involves the battle, being interrupted by outside forces. Perhaps the noise of combat attracts other inhabitants of the planet. Feral Orks from the spores, released during the original warband's arrival, might be drawn to the fight. Or in a more hopeful outcome, an Imperial vessel in the system might detect the energy signatures from the Dreadnought's weapons and investigate. The Adeptus Mechanicus, in particular, would be very interested in recovering such an ancient and valuable piece of technology. If Imperial forces did arrive and successfully extract Marcus, he would face the difficult process of reintegration into a galaxy that has moved on without him. His chapter is likely gone, absorbed into another, or destroyed entirely. The Imperium he served is even more dystopian and brutal than it was in his time. The friends he had, the leaders he served under, the very culture of his chapter, all of it would be lost. He would be a living relic, valuable for his experience and the technology of his dreadnought, but fundamentally out of place in the current era. Some chapters might welcome him with honor, recognizing his sacrifice and offering him a place among their ranks. Others might view him with suspicion, wondering if his extended time in stasis or his capture by Orks has somehow compromised him. The Inquisition would certainly want to interview him, to ensure that no taint of the Xenos has infected his mind. And the Adeptus Mechanicus would want to study his dreadnought, which might mean more intrusive examinations and modifications, different from the Orks' crude work, but potentially just as violating in their own way. The fourth possibility is that Marcus somehow manages not just to survive, but to escape. It would require tremendous luck and probably outside assistance, but it's not impossible. Perhaps in the chaos of the battle, a section of the Ork camp's ammunition storage detonates, creating enough confusion for Marcus to slip away. Perhaps the Dreadnought's power, cells, pushed beyond their normal limits, surge with one final burst of energy that allows him to break through the Ork lines and make it back to the ruins of his fortress monastery. If he did escape, Marcus would face the daunting task of survival on a hostile planet with a damaged dreadnought and no support structure. He would need to find a defensible position, probably in the ruins of the fortress, and hope that he could either repair his systems enough to signal for help, or wait for an Imperial presence in the system. Given that the planet has been abandoned for over 1,000 years, his chances of rescue would be slim. He might spend years or even decades waiting in the ruins, his dreadnought slowly deteriorating, before either dying alone or finally being found. The fifth, and perhaps most intriguing scenario, is that the Orks successfully loot the dreadnought and repurpose it for their own use. This would require them to either kill Marcus or find some way to remove him from the sarcophagus and replace him with one of their own. The technical challenges would be immense, even for a skilled mech boy like Bignuts. The neural interface between a space marine and a dreadnought is incredibly sophisticated, designed specifically for the enhanced physiology and black carapace implants of the Adeptus Astartes. But Orks have surprised the Imperium before with their ability to jury-rig solutions to technical problems that should be impossible. With enough time and resources, Bignuts might figure out how to bypass or replace the neural interface. He might even try to install an Ork directly into the dreadnought, creating something like a Def Dread, but using Imperial technology. The result would be a nightmare hybrid, a sacred space marine relic defiled and turned into a crude Ork war machine. Such a creation would be a propaganda victory for the Orks and a source of horror for any Imperial forces who encountered it. To see a dreadnought, painted in garish Ork colors, and fighting for the enemy would shake the morale of even veteran space marines. It would be a tangible symbol of the desecration that can befall even the most sacred Imperial relics in a galaxy where anything can happen and nothing is truly safe. Each of these scenarios reflects a fundamental truth about the Warhammer 40,000 setting. Outcomes are often arbitrary, victories are temporary, and tragedy is commonplace. Marcus's story, whether it ends in a heroic last stand, a slow death in captivity, unexpected rescue, or bizarre transformation into an Ork war machine, would be just one small thread in the vast cloth of the Imperium's endless wars. His personal tragedy, sleeping for over a millennium only to wake in the hands of enemies, is played out on countless worlds across the galaxy in different forms. And that, perhaps, is the most grimdark aspect of the entire scenario. Marcus is not special in his suffering. His is not a unique tragedy. Across the Imperium, space marines are lost, forgotten, and rediscovered in circumstances both better and worse than his. Some are rescued and returned to service. Others die alone, their sacrifices unrecorded. Some fall to chaos or Xenos corruption. Others are destroyed by friendly fire or political intrigue. In the vast machinery of the Imperium, individual fates matter little. Only service matters, only duty, only war. The broader implications, what this means for both sides. The discovery and awakening of a dreadnought that has been asleep for over 11 centuries represents more than just a single combat encounter between Orks and Space Marines. It touches on several of the core themes and realities of the Warhammer 40,000 setting, from the nature of memory and legacy to the brutal pragmatism of survival in a hostile galaxy. Let's explore what this scenario reveals about both the Imperium and the Orks, and what it means for the broader setting. For the Imperium, Marcus's story is a perfect encapsulation of the tragedy that underlies much of its military might. Space Marines are portrayed as the Emperor's finest warriors, superhuman heroes who transcend death itself through their determination and genetic enhancements. But the reality, as Marcus discovered, is far more grim. Even a Space Marine can be forgotten. Even a hero who has served for centuries can be lost in the bureaucratic chaos and endless wars that define the Imperium. The fact that Marcus slept for over 1,000 years without anyone coming to recover him speaks to a fundamental weakness in the Imperium's systems. This is not because the Imperium doesn't value its Space Marines. They are treasured above almost all other resources, their gene seed considered sacred, and their loss mourned with genuine grief. But the Imperium is vast beyond comprehension, spanning millions of worlds across the entire galaxy. The Administratum, the bureaucratic organization responsible for managing this empire, is a nightmare of red tape and inefficiency. Records are lost, worlds are forgotten. Orders take decades or centuries to reach their destinations. In such a system, the loss of a single dreadnought on a planet deemed strategically irrelevant is easy to overlook, especially when weighed against the thousands of other crises demanding attention. This bureaucratic indifference is one of the most insidious threats the Imperium faces. While chaos, corruption, Xenos invasions, and internal rebellion are all dramatic and obvious dangers, the slow rot of administrative incompetence is equally deadly in the long term. How many other lost dreadnoughts are there, sleeping in forgotten ruins across the galaxy? How many other relics and heroes have been abandoned simply because the paperwork got lost or the priorities shifted? The Imperium loses more to its own inefficiency than many of its enemies could hope to inflict through direct action. For the Space Marines specifically, Marcus's fate highlights the particular horror of Dreadnought: existence. Yes, it allows heroes to continue serving beyond the death of their mortal bodies. Yes, it preserves tactical knowledge and experience that would otherwise be lost. But it also creates the possibility of exactly this kind of abandonment. A normal Space Marine who falls in battle dies and is mourned. His gene seed is harvested, his name is added to the rolls of honor, and his sacrifice is remembered. A dreadnought can linger in a state that's neither life nor death, aware but isolated, capable of thought but unable to act for centuries or millennia. The psychological impact on the other dreadnoughts in the chapter, if they learned of Marcus's fate, would be significant. They already know that they're gambling with their sanity every time they wake from stasis. The knowledge that they could also be forgotten, left to sleep indefinitely while the galaxy moves on without them, would add another layer of anxiety to an existence already fraught with challenges. It might make some dreadnoughts more eager to be deployed, wanting to make their presence and value known so they won't be overlooked. Others might retreat further into themselves, preparing mentally for the possibility of abandonment. From a tactical perspective, the loss of a dreadnought to Ork capture would be concerning for Imperial forces, though perhaps not as much as one might think. While a dreadnought is a valuable piece of equipment, the Imperium has thousands of them across its various chapters. The loss of one, while regrettable, is not strategically significant. More concerning would be the possibility that the Orks might learn something from examining the dreadnought that could improve their own technology. This is where the Gestalt psychic field of the WAG becomes relevant. If the Orks successfully loot and modify the dreadnought, creating something that works through a combination of Imperial technology and Ork ingenuity, they might inadvertently develop new insights into Walker, construction or neural interface systems. These insights, spread through the Ork Gestalt consciousness, could lead to improvements in def dreads and kilocans across the sector or even the entire region. The Imperium's loss would become the Orks' gain, not in a direct one-to-one exchange, but through the organic evolution of Ork technology. For the Orks, the discovery of the Dreadnought is exactly the kind of lucky find that makes looting such a central part of their culture. This isn't just scrap metal or generic weaponry. This is a genuinely valuable piece of technology that, if they can figure out how to use it, could give Skragbad's warband a significant advantage. The prestige alone would be enormous. Other war bosses would hear about the time Skragbad's mech boys looted a Space Marine dreadnought, and some would inevitably come to challenge him for it or try to steal it for themselves. This creates an interesting dynamic within Ork society. The dreadnought becomes a status symbol, a prize that demonstrates Skragbad's success as a war boss, but it also makes him a target. Other Orks will want to prove they're better by taking it from him. This might lead to internal fighting within the warband as ambitious knobs try to claim the dreadnought for themselves. Or it might draw external threats as other warbands launch raids specifically to steal this valuable piece of loot. From the Orks' perspective, none of this is bad. The fighting is the whole point. Whether they're fighting Humies, other Xenos, or each other, Orks are happy as long as there's a good scrap to be had. The Dreadnought doesn't just give them a weapon or a piece of technology, it gives them a reason to fight, and for Orks, that's the most valuable thing in the galaxy. The broader thematic implications of this scenario touch on one of the core concepts of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The galaxy is vast, hostile, and fundamentally uncaring about individual fates. Marcus's service and sacrifice should matter. By any reasonable standard, a warrior who has served for over 1,300 years deserves better than to be forgotten and wake up in the hands of enemies. But the galaxy doesn't operate on reasonable standards. It operates on brutal pragmatism, bureaucratic indifference, and the random chaos of war. This is what makes the setting grimdark. It's not just that bad things happen to good people, it's that bad things happen without meaning, without purpose, without anyone even noticing. Marcus could die fighting Orks on a forgotten world, and the only people who would ever know are the Orks who killed him. No record would exist of his final stand. No honors would be bestowed. No successor chapter would remember his name. He would simply cease to exist, erased from history as thoroughly as if he had never lived at all. And yet, even in this bleakest of scenarios, there's something redemptive. Marcus fights because that's what Space Marines do, not for recognition or reward, but because it's the right thing to do, because duty demands it, because the Emperor's enemies must be opposed regardless of whether anyone is watching. This selfless dedication to duty, this willingness to fight even when forgotten and alone, is what separates the Space Marines from mere soldiers. They are warriors in the truest sense, finding meaning and purpose in the act of combat itself, rather than in external validation. This is the tragedy and the glory of the Adeptus Astartes. They are created to be weapons, tools of the Imperium's will, expected to fight and die without question. But they transcend that role through their devotion, their brotherhood, and their unshakable conviction that what they do matters, even if the galaxy never acknowledges it. Marcus, fighting his last battle against impossible odds, with no hope of rescue or recognition, embodies both the horror and the nobility of what it means to be a Space Marine in the 41st millennium. Historical precedents and similar events. The scenario of Orks discovering and looting Imperial military equipment is far from unique in the history of Warhammer 40,000. The galaxy has witnessed countless similar encounters, each one a testament to both the Orks' opportunistic nature and the Imperium's inability to maintain control over all its vast holdings. Understanding these historical precedents helps contextualize Marcus's situation and shows that his personal tragedy is part of a much larger pattern. Perhaps the most famous example of Ork looting on a massive scale is the fall of the Forge world Tigris. Forge worlds are planets dedicated entirely to manufacturing, controlled by the Adeptus Mechanicus, and producing everything from basic laser guns to Titan war machines. Tigris was a major industrial center, its forges running continuously to supply the Imperial war machine. When an enormous Ork descended on the system, the Mechanicus defenders fought valiantly, but they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The Orks didn't just destroy Tigris, they occupied it, turned its factories to their own purposes, and began producing Ork weapons and vehicles using Imperial equipment and techniques. The implications were staggering. The Orks gained access to manufacturing capabilities far beyond what their typical workshops could produce. They learned new techniques, new designs, new approaches to building war machines. And through the Gestalt psychic field of the Wag, this knowledge spread to other Ork populations across the sector. Suddenly, Imperial forces were facing Orks with better equipment, more sophisticated vehicles, and weapons that were disturbingly effective. It took decades of brutal campaigning to finally purge the Orks from Tigris, and by then, the damage was done. The knowledge they'd gained couldn't be erased. Another relevant example is the numerous instances of Orks looting Imperial vehicles. Leman Russ battle tanks, in particular, are popular targets because they're relatively simple to operate and devastatingly effective when they work properly. The Orks' approach to looting tanks is characteristically direct. They kill the crew, claim the vehicle, and then modify it to suit their tastes. The modifications usually involve removing or bypassing sophisticated systems the Orks don't understand, adding more weapons, and painting it in bright, garish colors. What makes these looted tanks particularly effective is the Orks' Gestalt psychic field. An Imperial tank operated by Orks shouldn't work as well as it does. The sophisticated fire control systems are usually disabled or damaged. The maintenance is non-existent by Imperial standards. The ammunition is often the wrong type or improperly stored. And yet, when an Ork pulls the trigger, the tank fires. When an Ork presses the accelerator, the engine roars to life. The whack field fills in the gaps, making the improbable functional and the dysfunctional adequate. The Death Skulls clan has built their entire culture around looting. They're so effective at it that other Ork clans, while mocking them for being thieves, also grudgingly respect their ability to acquire valuable equipment. The Death Skulls have been known to loot vehicles in the middle of battle, sometimes while the original crew is still fighting in them. They'll steal weapons from dead enemies, armor from fallen comrades, and parts from damaged vehicles. Nothing is sacred to a Death Skull, and nothing is too dangerous to try to loot. There are also darker precedents involving Chaos forces. When the forces of Chaos capture Imperial equipment, the results are often more disturbing than when Orks do the same. Chaos corrupts, twisting and perverting everything it touches. An Imperial tank in the hands of Chaos worshippers becomes a screaming metal daemon, its systems infused with warp energy and its crew transformed into something no longer entirely human. A Dreadnought captured by Chaos forces becomes a hellbrute, the occupant, driven mad by prolonged exposure to the warp, and the machine itself becoming a prison of eternal torment. The difference between Ork and Chaos corruption is significant. Orks deface and modify, but they don't fundamentally change the nature of what they loot. A looted Leman Russ is still recognizably a tank, even if it's covered in spikes and painted bright red. But Chaos corruption goes deeper, changing things on a fundamental level that can never be reversed. From a certain perspective, being looted by Orks might be preferable to falling into Chaos hands. At least the machine remains fundamentally intact, even if its sanctity is violated. There are documented cases of Space Marine equipment being looted by Orks, though they're relatively rare because Space Marines are very good at recovering their fallen and their equipment. Power armor, in particular, is almost never left on the battlefield. The gene seed within must be recovered, and the armor itself is too valuable to abandon. But accidents happen. Battles are lost. Sometimes, in the chaos of a full retreat, equipment is left behind. And when Orks find it, they invariably try to use it. Ork-modified power armor is a grotesque sight. The armor is designed for Space Marines, with their enhanced physiology and black carapace implants. An Ork can't interface with it properly, but that doesn't stop them from trying. They'll cut it apart, weld pieces together to fit their larger frames, and create crude suits of mega armor that incorporate Space Marine technology. These suits are less sophisticated than proper mega armor, but they're also more durable than normal Ork armor, and that's good enough for most Orks. The closest historical parallel to Marcus's situation might be the legend of Grabber Gutsbag, an Ork looter who supposedly managed to loot an Imperial Titan. Titans are the largest war machines the Imperium fields, towering constructs piloted by entire crews and armed with weapons that can level cities. The idea that an Ork could loot one seems absurd, but the story persists in Ork culture, and that means something. Even if Grabber never existed, the fact that Orks believe he did is significant. It shapes their behavior, encouraging them to attempt increasingly audacious looting operations on the grounds that if Grabber could do it, so can they. These historical examples show that Marcus's discovery by Orks fits into a long tradition of Xenos opportunism and imperial loss. The galaxy is littered with the remnants of human civilization, from ancient archaeotech from the dark age of technology to relatively recent imperial equipment from failed campaigns. All of it is potentially valuable to someone, whether that's orcs looking for loot, chaos cultists seeking powerful relics, or even other imperial forces who need to scavenge equipment to survive. The Imperium's inability to recover all its lost equipment is not a failure of will or capability, but simply a consequence of scale. The Imperium is too large, too spread out, and too embattled on too many fronts to properly account for everything. Some losses are acceptable. Some equipment is deemed too difficult or expensive to recover. And sometimes, as in Marcus's case, people simply forget that something valuable was left behind. This creates opportunities for everyone except the Imperium. Orks, in particular, thrive in this environment of constant conflict and abandoned resources. They don't need sophisticated supply chains or manufacturing facilities. They can make do with whatever they find, modifying and adapting it to suit their needs. This adaptability, combined with their rapid reproduction through spores and their gestalt psychic field, makes them one of the most successful species in the galaxy by any measure. And it ensures that scenarios like Marcus's will continue to play out across the galaxy, in variations both subtle and dramatic, for as long as the Imperium endures and the Orks remain the opportunistic scavengers they've always been. Conclusion. The story of what happens when Orks find a Dreadnought that's been asleep for 1,111 years is, at its heart, a perfect encapsulation of everything that makes Warhammer 40,000 compelling as a setting. It combines tragedy with dark humor, heroism with futility, and the grandiose with the absurd. Brother Captain Marcus, a warrior who served the Emperor for over 1,300 years across battles and centuries, wakes from his millennium-long sleep, not to a hero's welcome or a new crusade, but to the chaotic reality of an Ork workshop, where his sacred war machine is being treated as little more than interesting salvage. The contrast could not be more stark. On one side, you have everything the Imperium claims to represent: honor, duty, sacrifice, and the nobility of service even beyond death. Marcus embodies these ideals. He fought until his body was broken, accepted the living death of Dreadnought interment, and would have continued serving if circumstances had allowed. On the other side, you have the Orks, who represent the antithesis of these values. They have no concept of honor as the Imperium understands it, no reverence for the sacred, no respect for tradition or sacrifice. They see a big, stompy walker covered in valuable bits, and their only thought is how to claim it for themselves and make it more Orky. And yet, there's something almost refreshing about the Orks' approach. They're honest in their simplicity. They don't claim to be serving some greater purpose or higher ideal. They fight because they enjoy fighting. They loot because they like having stuff. There's no hypocrisy, no hidden agendas, no complex political maneuvering. An Ork is exactly what he appears to be: a brutal warrior who lives for combat and dies with a grin on his face if the fight was good enough. This contrast extends to how each side approaches technology. The Imperium treats its equipment as sacred, every piece blessed by the Adeptus Mechanicus and maintained with ritualistic precision. A Dreadnought is not just a machine, but a shrine, housing a revered warrior and covered in purity seals and prayers to the machine's spirit. The Orks, meanwhile, treat technology as a tool to be used, modified, and improved according to need. If something doesn't work, hit it with a hammer. If it's not Orky enough, weld on some spikes. If it's too small, make it bigger. Their approach is crude, but remarkably effective, especially when backed by the Gestalt psychic field that makes their ramshackle creations actually function. The irony is that both approaches have significant flaws. The Imperium's reverence for technology has led to stagnation. They can maintain and sometimes copy existing designs. But true innovation is rare and often viewed with suspicion. The standard template. Construct systems from the dark age of technology are lost, and the Adeptus Mechanicus hoards what knowledge remains, doling it out only to the faithful. Meanwhile, the Orks' approach, while flexible and creative, is limited by their fundamental understanding of how things work. They can modify and improve, but they can't create truly new technologies. They're stuck in a cycle of looting and modification, always dependent on other races to develop new equipment they can then steal. For Marcus personally, whatever his final fate, the scenario represents the ultimate test of everything he believes. If he dies fighting the Orks, does it matter that no one will remember his sacrifice? If he's captured and imprisoned, can he maintain his faith and identity when stripped of the ability to fight? If he's somehow rescued, can he find a place in an Imperium that has moved on without him? These questions go to the heart of what it means to be a space marine, to be a warrior whose entire existence is defined by service to something larger than himself. The answer, if there is one, lies in the nature of duty itself. A space marine doesn't serve because he expects recognition or reward. He serves because duty demands it, because the Emperor's enemies must be opposed, because someone has to stand on the wall between humanity and the darkness. Whether anyone remembers, whether anyone cares, whether it makes any difference in the grand scheme of things. These questions are irrelevant to the central fact of duty. A space marine fights because that's what space marines do. Everything else is secondary. This is simultaneously the most inspiring and the most depressing aspect of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. The Imperium asks everything of its defenders and gives them almost nothing in return, except the privilege of dying for humanity's continued survival. And yet, those defenders continue to serve, continue to fight, continue to sacrifice themselves without question or complaint. They do this not because they're mindless automata, but because they genuinely believe in what they're doing. They've looked at the alternatives, at the chaos, corruption, and xenos depredation and human weakness that threaten to destroy everything, and they've decided that fighting is the only acceptable response. Marcus's story, whether it ends in death, capture, rescue, or some other fate, is just one small thread in the vast tapestry of the Imperium's endless wars. There are countless other dreadnoughts sleeping in stasis, countless other warriors waiting to be called to battle, countless other heroes whose sacrifices will go unremembered and unremarked. And there are countless Ork warbands looking for loot, countless Xenos threats pressing in on all sides, countless dangers lurking in the darkness between the stars. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and in that war, individuals matter far less than their willingness to continue fighting. Marcus mattered not because he was special or unique, but because he exemplified what every space marine should be: unwavering in duty, fearless in combat, and devoted to the Emperor even unto death. Whether his story ends in triumph or tragedy, whether he's remembered or forgotten, whether he makes any difference at all, he served. And in the end, that's all any space marine can hope for. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the many dark corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. There are countless other stories to explore, from the grand campaigns of the Space Marine chapters to the bizarre and terrifying encounters that happen in the forgotten reaches of the galaxy. The 41st Millennium is vast, and its darkness contains wonders and horrors beyond imagination. Join us as we continue to explore them, one story at a time. And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. How you face that war defines everything.